I am standing on the front porch of my son's house, water dripping from my nose, my hand trembling inches from the doorbell. But I never press it, because through the cracked bay window, I hear the voice of Sandra, my daughter-in-law, sharp and cruel. I honestly hope the old hag crashes on the way here. Then the beach house will be mine, and we can finally be free. And then the sound that breaks my heart forever, Timothy's laugh. My son, the boy I raised alone, laughing at the thought of my car wrapping around a tree. I feel the air leave my chest, but I do not cry. I do not barge in. I simply lower my hand, clutch the wet velvet box tighter against my chest, and turn around. Inside that box is his father's vintage Rolex and thousands in savings bonds, a birthday gift worth over $8,000. Now, it's just a reminder of a wasted life. The storm screams around me as I walk back to my car, but the rage inside me is louder. And as I turn the ignition, I make a promise to the night. Give me 30 days. Just 30 days. And they won't even have a roof over their heads. Quick question. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments and subscribe. Ready for an amazing story? Let's begin. I should have been home. I should have been safe in my little seaside house in Charleston, sitting in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea, listening to the storm from a distance. Instead, I was 3 hours into a 5-hour drive to Piedmont, Georgia, risking my life on I-26. Why? Because today was the day. It was Timothy's 40th birthday. You don't miss your son's 40th birthday. Not when you're a mother like me. Not when your son is the only family you have left. A massive semi-truck roared past me in the left lane, kicking up a wall of dirty water that completely blinded me for a terrifying 3 seconds. My heart slammed against my ribs. I felt the car drift slightly, the tires fighting for traction on the slick road. I gasped, easing my foot off the gas, my entire body tense, waiting for the crash. The water cleared. The taillights of the truck faded into the gloom ahead. I let out a shaky breath, my hands trembling on the leather wheel. Just keep going, Cynthia, I whispered to myself. You're almost there. He's waiting for you. I glanced at the passenger seat. Sitting there, strapped in by the seatbelt like a precious passenger, was a large velvet-wrapped box. Inside that box was $8,000 worth of love. It wasn't just money. It was a vintage Rolex I had kept in the safe at my antique store for years. It was a stack of savings bonds I had been maturing since he was a teenager. It was the kind of gift that says, I love you, but also, I'm sorry. Sorry for what? I wasn't entirely sure. Maybe sorry that his father died when he was just a boy. Maybe sorry that I had to work so hard to build the business that I missed some of his soccer games. Maybe sorry that lately our phone calls had become short, strained exchanges about the weather or his finances, never about his heart or mine. I thought about Robert, my late husband. When he passed, my world shattered. Timothy was just a child then. I looked at his little face at the funeral, so confused and scared. And I made a vow right there at the graveside. I promised I would be enough for both of us. I promised he would never want for anything. I worked myself to the bone to keep that promise. I built the antique shop from nothing. I paid for the college tuition. I helped with the down payment on that big, beautiful house in Piedmont. I did it all because I thought that if I gave him enough, he wouldn't feel the hole his father left behind. But somewhere along the way, the gratitude stopped. The thank you, Mom, turned into, is that it? The visits became fewer. The distance grew, not just in miles, but in spirit. The rain picked up again, drumming a deafening rhythm on the roof. I felt a sharp ache in my lower back. 5 hours is a long time for anyone, but at my age, it feels like a marathon. My eyes burned from staring at the reflective lane markers. He'll be so happy. I told myself, trying to push away the doubt. When he sees the watch, when he sees the bonds, he'll understand how much I care. We'll sit down, have a slice of cake, and talk. Really talk. That was the hope keeping me on the road. The hope that this gift, this grand, expensive gesture, would finally bridge the gap between us. I wanted to see his eyes light up the way they used to when he was 10 years old, and I brought him a new bicycle. I wanted to feel needed again. Another gust of wind shook the car. The storm was getting worse as I crossed into Georgia. The forecast had mentioned severe thunderstorm warnings, perhaps even a tornado watch, but I had waved it off. "I'm coming, Timothy," I said aloud, my voice sounding small in the cabin. I remembered the last time we spoke. It was 2 weeks ago. He sounded annoyed, rushed. He asked if I was still coming for his birthday. I said yes. He said, "Okay, well, don't stay too long, Mom. Sandra and I have a busy week." Sandra, my daughter-in-law. My grip on the wheel tightened even more. I tried to be fair to Sandra. She was charming when they first met. But over the years, I watched how she looked at my things, how she asked about the business, how she always seemed to be the one whispering in Timothy's ear when he needed help with a bill. But I pushed that thought away. Not today. Today was about Timothy. The car ahead of me slammed on its brakes. I stomped on mine, the anti-lock system pulsing against my foot. The car fishtailed, sliding right, then left. I steered into the skid, just like Robert taught me 40 years ago. Don't panic. Don't panic. The car straightened out, missing the bumper in front of me by inches. I let out a sob, the adrenaline crashing through my system. I was terrified. I wanted to pull over. I wanted to go home to my safe, dry house and call him in the morning. But I couldn't. I had gifts to deliver. I had a son to buy back. So I took a deep breath, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and pressed the gas pedal again. I drove on into the black, stormy night, unaware that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one waiting for me at my son's front door. I finally saw the exit sign for Piedmont. My shoulders slumped with relief, but the tension didn't leave my body. The storm had followed me the entire way, a relentless gray curtain that refused to lift. By the time I turned onto the winding streets of my son's neighborhood, my hands were cramping from gripping the wheels so tight. Timothy lives in a beautiful neighborhood. It's the kind of place where the lawns are manicured by professionals, the driveways are lined with expensive stone, and the houses look like they belong in a magazine. As I pulled up to his house, a massive 2-story brick colonial with white pillars, I felt a familiar pang of pride. I helped make this happen. I sat in my idling car for a moment, the rain hammering against the roof. I looked at the house through the blurry windshield. I remembered the day Timothy signed the deed. He didn't have the credit score for the mortgage on his own, and Sandra certainly didn't have the savings. I had stepped in. I wrote a check for $60,000 for the down payment. I told myself it was an investment in his future, in his happiness. "You're a good mother, Cynthia," I whispered to myself, unbuckling my seatbelt. I needed to hear it, even if it only came from my own lips. I grabbed the velvet-wrapped box from the passenger seat and tucked it under my coat. I didn't have an umbrella. I must have left it at the shop in my rush to leave. So I opened the car door and made a run for it. The cold rain hit me instantly, soaking through my thin blouse within seconds. My shoes splashed into a puddle as I hurried up the long walkway. By the time I reached the shelter of the front porch, I was shivering violently. My hair was plastered to my forehead, and water dripped from my nose. I must have looked a sight, but I didn't care. I was here. I was safe, and I had the gift. The porch was expansive, wrapped around the side of the house. Warm, golden light spilled out from the living room windows, casting long shadows on the wet concrete. I could hear music thumping faintly from inside. It sounded like a party. I wiped my feet on the mat, trying to compose myself. I reached out a shaking hand to ring the doorbell, but then I froze. The living room window was just to the right of the door. It was a large bay window, and because of the storm, or maybe just carelessness, it was cracked open slightly at the top. The sound of laughter drifted out, cutting through the noise of the wind. It was a laugh I knew well. It was Sandra's laugh. It was high-pitched, sharp, and usually meant she had a glass of wine in her hand. God, look at the time. Sandra's voice floated out, clear as a bell. It's nearly 9 o'clock. Do you think she's actually coming? My hand hovered inches from the doorbell. I smiled instinctively. They were worried about me. They were waiting. Then I heard Timothy. She said she was driving. You know, Mom, she's stubborn. She probably drove 30 miles, an hour the whole way just to annoy me. My smile faltered. To annoy him? I had just driven through a hurricane for him. Well, Sandra sighed, and I could hear the clinking of glass. I honestly hope she doesn't show up. The house is finally clean. The guests are having fun. And the last thing I want is her sitting in the corner judging my appetizers and asking when we're going to give her a grandchild. It's exhausting, Timothy. My heart gave a painful thump. I lowered my hand slowly. I felt like an intruder in my own life. I wanted to yell out, to say, I never judge your appetizers. I just want to be part of the family. But I stayed silent. I stood there, shivering in the wet cold, hugging the gift box to my chest like a shield. She's not that bad, Timothy said. I let out a breath. I didn't know I was holding. Thank you, son. Defend me. She's worse, Sandra snapped. Her voice dropped, becoming venomous. She's controlling. She holds that money over our heads like a weapon. Oh, I paid for the down payment. So I should have a key? Oh, I paid for the car. So I should get to choose the color. I'm sick of it. She's an old hag, Timothy, a bitter, lonely old hag. The words hit me harder than the rain. Old hag. Is that what she called me when I wasn't there? I waited for Timothy to explode. I waited for him to tell his wife not to speak about his mother that way. I waited for the loyalty I had paid for with 40 years of blood, sweat, and tears. Instead, silence. Then, a heavy sigh from my son. I know, babe, Timothy said. His voice wasn't angry. It was resigned. Bored, even. I know she's a lot. But we have to play the game a little longer. She's getting older. Her health isn't what it used to be. I don't want to play the game. Sandra shouted, her voice slurring slightly. I want her out of our lives. I honestly hope the old hag crashes on the way here. I really do. Think about it, Tim. If she crashes, no more Sunday calls. No more guilt trips. I stopped breathing. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She had just wished death on me. My daughter-in-law, the woman I welcomed into my home, the woman I bought a Mercedes for last Christmas, just wished I would die in a ditch on the interstate. I pressed my ear closer to the window, praying, begging God that Timothy would stop this. Don't say that, Timothy said, chuckling. He chuckled, but he continued, and this was the knife twisting in my gut. If she did crash, then the beach house would be mine, and the business accounts. We'd be free, Sandra, finally free from that controlling woman. Imagine, Sandra purred. We could sell that dusty old shop, sell her beach house, and move to Florida like we wanted. We'd be rich, Tim, and we wouldn't have to say, thank you, Mommy, ever again. I am tired of playing the dutiful son, Timothy admitted, the sound of him pouring another drink echoing through the glass. I've been pretending for years, just nodding and smiling so she keeps the checks coming. It's exhausting acting like I care about her boring stories or her antique junk. I just want the inheritance. Sandra! I just want what I'm owed. What he was owed. I stood on that porch, the water dripping from my coat, forming a puddle around my feet. I didn't feel the cold anymore. I didn't feel the dampness of my clothes. I felt a scorching, blinding heat rising up my neck. I looked down at the velvet box in my hands. Inside was the Rolex his father had worn. Inside were bonds I had scraped and saved for since 1995. Playing the dutiful son, pretending to care, just want the inheritance. My entire life, my entire identity as a mother, unraveled in 2 minutes on a rainy porch in Georgia. I wasn't a mother to him. I was a bank account. I was an obstacle. I was a hag standing between him and a payday. I looked through the crack in the curtains. I saw them. Timothy was sitting on the leather sofa I bought them, his feet up on the coffee table. Sandra was refilling his wine glass, laughing. They looked happy. They looked comfortable. They looked like two people waiting for a lottery winner to die. A tear hot as lava rolled down my cheek, mixing with the rain. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of mourning. I was mourning the son I thought I had. That boy was dead. The man sitting on that sofa was a stranger. A greedy, heartless stranger. I raised my hand to the doorbell again. My finger hovered over the button. I could push it. I could walk in there, throw the box at his head, and scream until my throat bled. I could confront them. I could demand an explanation. But then I saw Sandra lean in and kiss him, and Timothy smiled. A genuine, relaxed smile I hadn't seen directed at me in 20 years. If I went in there now, they would just lie. They would act concerned. They would fetch me a towel and say, "Oh, Mom, we were just joking. You know how much we love you." They would gaslight me, take the $8,000 gift, and laugh about it the second I left. No, screaming was too good for them. Confrontation was too easy. I slowly lowered my hand. I stepped back from the window, careful not to make a sound on the wet floorboards. I clutched the gift box so tight the velvet crushed under my fingers. They wanted the old hag to disappear. They wanted the inheritance. They wanted to be free. I turned around and looked out at the storm raging in the driveway. The rain was coming down harder than ever, but I didn't fear it anymore. I had survived the drive here. I had survived the death of my husband. I would survive this. "Happy birthday, Timothy," I whispered into the wind. I wasn't going to ring the bell, but I wasn't just going to leave either. I had to leave a message. I had to let them know that the Bank of Mom hadn't just closed for the night. It had closed forever. I walked quietly back toward the driveway, my mind racing faster than the storm clouds above. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I stood there for another minute, the rain soaking through the shoulders of my coat, staring at the velvet box in my hands. The weight of it felt different now. A moment ago, it had felt like a peace offering, a bridge to my son's heart. Now it just felt heavy. It felt like a fool's burden. Inside that box was a vintage Rolex. It was the one Robert, my late husband, had worn every single day. I had saved it for 20 years, keeping it polished and safe, waiting for the day Timothy turned 40. I thought giving it to him would be a passing of the torch, a symbol that he was the man of the family now. But the man inside that house wasn't a man. He was a leech. And you don't put a Rolex on a leech. My grip tightened on the box. "No," I whispered. The word was swallowed by the wind, but I felt it vibrate in my chest. Absolutely not. I turned the box over in my hands. There was a beautiful card attached to the ribbon. I had spent 20 minutes writing it earlier that morning. It said, "To my wonderful son, Timothy." I am so proud of the man you've become. Love always, Mom. I ripped the card off. The sound of the thick paper tearing was satisfying, sharp, and final. I crumpled it into a ball and shoved it into my wet pocket. That message was a lie now. I wasn't proud. I was horrified, but I couldn't just leave. If I just walked away, they would think I never came. They would call me tomorrow, fake sweet voices asking where I was. And the game would continue. They needed to know. They needed to know that the old hag had ears. They needed to know the exact moment the gravy train derailed. I fumbled with my purse, my wet fingers struggling with the zipper. I needed paper. I needed a pen. I dug past my wallet, past the tissues, and my hand brushed against a crinkled slip of paper. I pulled it out. It was a gas station receipt from earlier in the trip, back when I was just a hopeful mother driving through a storm. It was wrinkled and slightly damp, but the back was blank. It was perfect. It was trash, just like their behavior. I found a ballpoint pen at the bottom of my bag. I clicked it, pressing the receipt against the wet siding of the house to steady it. My hand was shaking, not from the cold anymore, but from a pure, white-hot adrenaline. I wrote in big, jagged letters, "Happy 40th. I heard everything. The old hag is going home. Enjoy your freedom." I stared at the words. They weren't poetic. They weren't the words of a nurturing mother. They were the words of a woman who was done. Enjoy your freedom. That was the kicker. They wanted to be free of me. Fine. Let's see how free they feel when the mortgage payment is due next week. I walked up to the front door one last time. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't knock. I took the receipt and wedged it firmly into the gap between the door handle and the frame. It fluttered in the wind, a stark white flag of war against the dark wood. Timothy would find it when he opened the door to let his guests out, or when he looked outside to see if the storm had passed. He would see it, and he would know. I turned my back on the house. I tucked the velvet box securely under my arm. My husband's watch was coming home with me, and I marched back to the car. I didn't run this time. I walked with purpose. Getting back into the driver's seat felt like entering a sanctuary. The silence of the car was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic thrumming of the rain. I locked the doors instantly. It was a reflex. I suddenly felt unsafe this close to them. I put the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. The headlights swept across the front of the house, illuminating the rain-slicked porch one last time. For a second, I saw a shadow move behind the curtains. Was that Timothy coming to check? I didn't wait to find out. I threw the car into reverse and backed out of the driveway, the tires crunching on the expensive gravel I had paid for. As I drove down the street, putting distance between myself and my son, I expected to cry. I expected to fall apart. But the tears didn't come. Instead, a strange clarity settled over me. It was the clarity of a business owner realizing a bad investment needed to be cut loose. I reached the main road, but I knew I couldn't drive 5 hours back to Charleston. My hands were trembling too much, and the storm was still raging. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. I needed a place to stop. I needed a place to think. I saw a neon sign flickering through the downpour about 2 miles down the road. Motel 6. Vacancy. It wasn't the Ritz. It wasn't the guest room at my son's house with the high-thread count sheets. I had bought them as a housewarming gift. But it was mine. It was a space I was paying for, where no one would call me names or wish me dead. I pulled into the parking lot. I grabbed my purse and the velvet box. I wasn't leaving that watch out of my sight, and ran into the lobby. The night clerk, a young man with tired eyes, looked up, surprised to see a soaking wet 67-year-old woman at 9:30 p.m. in a thunderstorm. "Just a single room for tonight, please," I said, My voice sounded surprisingly steady, even to my own ears. He handed me a key card without asking questions. Room 104. Down the hall, ma'am. I let myself into the room. It smelled like industrial cleaner and stale air. The carpet was a harsh green, and the bedspread was a faded floral pattern. I didn't care. I locked the deadbolt and the chain. I sat down on the edge of the bed and placed the velvet box on the nightstand next to the Bible. I took off my wet coat and shoes. My feet were freezing. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out my cell phone. The screen lit up with a picture of Timothy and me from 5 years ago. We were smiling. I looked at his face in the photo. It was the face of a liar. I knew what was coming. Once he found that note, the phone would start ringing. He would panic. He would realize the money was gone. He would try to spin it, try to say I misunderstood, try to gaslight me back into submission. I wasn't going to give him the chance. I wasn't going to listen to his voice tonight. I held the power button down. The screen asked, "Power off?" "Yes," I said out loud to the empty motel room. I swiped the screen. The phone went black. Silence. Absolute silence. I lay back on the stiff pillows and pulled the thin blanket up to my chin. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't worrying about Timothy. I wasn't wondering if he had enough money, or if he was happy, or if he needed me. He wanted freedom. He just got it. I closed my eyes, listening to the rain hit the motel window. Tomorrow, I had a meeting with a lawyer to schedule. But tonight, I was going to sleep. And I had a feeling that while I slept, the panic across town was just beginning. I woke up before the sun. The motel curtains were thin, letting in the gray, early morning light of a day that had stopped raining. I lay there for a moment, staring at the popcorn ceiling, waiting for the familiar heavy feeling of sadness to hit me. I waited for the tears I had held back in the car. I waited for the urge to call Timothy and ask if we could just forget last night happened. But the sadness didn't come. Instead, I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. It was clarity. It was the feeling you get when you finally turn on the lights in a basement and see the cracks in the foundation you've been ignoring for years. I sat up. My back was stiff from the cheap mattress. My clothes from yesterday were draped over the chair, stiff and wrinkled. I didn't care. I wasn't here to look pretty. I was here to work. I swung my legs out of bed and walked over to the small round table in the corner. I moved the plastic ice bucket and the takeout menu aside and set up my laptop. I always traveled with it to manage the antique store's inventory, but today I wasn't looking at antiques. I opened the lid, the screen glowing blue in the dim room. I navigated to my bank's website. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For years, I had treated my finances like a foggy window. I knew what was there, but I didn't look too closely because I was afraid of what I'd see. I was afraid to admit how much my love was costing me. I typed in my password and hit enter. The dashboard loaded. I clicked on transaction history and then recurring transfers. The list populated the screen. It was long. It was horrifying. I pulled a notepad from my purse, the same notepad I used to track auction bids, and I clicked my pen. I was going to do the math. I was going to see exactly what playing the dutiful son cost per month. The first item was the biggest, Piedmont Mortgage Servicing, $3,450. I stared at the number. I remembered the day Timothy and Sandra found that house. They had come to me with puppy dog eyes. "It's a safe neighborhood, Mom," Timothy had said. "A good school district for when we have kids." They never had kids, but they had a guest room with an ensuite bathroom that I had slept in maybe 3 times in 10 years. I wrote the number down. Next line, Mercedes-Benz Financial, $875. That was Sandra's car. a white SUV she needed for her real estate career. A career that, as far as I knew, had resulted in 0 sales in the last 2 years. I remembered her hugging me when I signed the lease, telling me I was the best mother-in-law in the world. Last night, I was an old hag. The best mother-in-law in the world was apparently only good as long as the payments cleared. I wrote the number down. Next line, Timothy Raleigh Consulting, $4,200. This one made my hand shake. 5 years ago, Timothy had lost his job in marketing. He was depressed. He couldn't get off the couch. I wanted to give him dignity, so I hired him as a consultant for my antique store. His job was supposed to be managing the website and social media. I opened a new tab and went to my store's Facebook page. The last post was from 6 months ago. It had a typo. He wasn't working. He was collecting an allowance, a $50,000 a year allowance for a 40-year-old man who called me controlling behind my back. I wrote the number down. Then there were the smaller, irregular hits. The Zelle transfers. $500 for emergency vet bill, $300 for car repair, $1,200 for Sandra's medical procedure, which I later found out was Botox. I tallied it all up. The number at the bottom of the page made me nauseous. Over $8,000 a month. That was nearly $100,000 a year. I sat back in the hard wooden chair, the numbers swimming before my eyes. That money wasn't just numbers. That was my life. That was the early mornings scouring estate sales in the freezing cold. That was the late nights polishing silver until my fingers bled. That was the retirement trips I never took because Timothy needed help. I hadn't raised a son. I had financed a leech. And what did I get in return? I got a son who laughed when his wife wished I would die in a car crash so they could get the rest. It stops, I said out loud. The sound of my own voice in the quiet room was firm. It stops today. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. I had turned it off last night to get some peace. I took a deep breath and held the power button. The Apple logo appeared. Then the home screen. Immediately, the phone started vibrating. It buzzed and danced across the table like an angry hornet. The notifications cascaded down the screen in an endless stream. 53 missed calls from Timothy, 12 missed calls from Sandra, 24 text messages. I didn't open the texts. I could guess what they said. Mom, where are you? Mom, it's not what you think. Mom, Sandra was drunk. She didn't mean it. Mom, please pick up. We're worried. Worried. They weren't worried about me. If I had crashed into a tree, they would have popped champagne. They were worried about the bank account. They were worried because they found the receipt in the door handle and realized the ATM was out of order. The phone started ringing again in my hand. The screen flashed, Timothy, son. I looked at the photo. It was a picture of him at his college graduation. I had paid for that degree, too. I didn't feel the urge to answer. I didn't feel the need to hear his excuse. Every time I had listened to him in the past, it had cost me money. Today, silence was free. I tapped the icon next to his name. I scrolled down to the bottom of the contact card. There, in red letters, block this caller. I pressed it. A confirmation box popped up. You will not receive phone calls, messages, or FaceTime from people on the block list. I pressed block contact. Then I went to Sandra's name. I didn't even look at her photo. Block contact. The phone stopped buzzing. The room went silent again. I felt a rush of dopamine. So strong it almost made me dizzy. It was a physical weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in decades, I wasn't available. I wasn't on call. I wasn't the safety net. I looked back at the laptop screen. The banking tab was still open. I wasn't just going to block their calls. I was going to block their lifestyle. But I had to be smart. I couldn't just click cancel. on everything right this second. I needed to do this legally. I needed to make sure they couldn't claim I was senile or that this was a mistake. I opened my email and started a new draft to James Carter, my attorney in Charleston. James had been telling me for years to cut them off. He was going to enjoy this meeting. Subject: urgent meeting, estate changes. James, I am in Piedmont. I am safe. I need an emergency appointment tomorrow morning. I am revoking Timothy's power of attorney. I am removing him from the will. And I need to discuss the legal process for evicting a tenant from a property I own. See you at 9 a.m. Cynthia. I hit send. I closed the laptop. I tore the page with the calculations out of my notepad, folded it neatly, and put it in my purse. I would keep that page. I would frame it. It was the most expensive lesson I had ever learned, but at least I had finally learned it. I stood up and walked to the bathroom to wash my face. I looked in the mirror. I looked tired. My eyes were puffy and my hair was a mess. But there was something else in my reflection that hadn't been there yesterday. My husband, Robert, used to say I had steel in my spine when I had to deal with tough antique dealers. I hadn't seen that steel in a long time. I thought it had rusted away with age and motherhood. But there it was, looking back at me. I splashed cold water on my face, dried off with the scratchy motel towel, and picked up my car keys. I had a 5-hour drive back to Charleston. The storm was over. The roads were drying. And for the first time in 40 years, I was driving toward a future that belonged only to me. The drive back to Charleston felt different. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a brilliant, innocent blue, but inside my car, the atmosphere was grim. I wasn't driving home to rest. I was driving straight to war. I pulled into the parking lot of Carter and Associates at 8:50 a.m. James Carter has been my lawyer for 30 years. He handled Robert's estate. He helped me incorporate the antique store. And for the last decade, he has been the one gently suggesting I reevaluate my financial support of Timothy. I walked into his office, the velvet box still tucked in my purse. I wasn't letting that watch out of my sight. Cynthia, James said, standing up from his mahogany desk. He looked concerned. I must have looked terrible, wearing yesterday's clothes, no makeup, dark circles under my eyes. You said it was urgent. Is everything all right? No, James, I said, sitting down in the leather chair opposite him. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Everything is wrong, but I'm here to fix it. I took a deep breath. I need to revoke Timothy's power of attorney. Immediately. Today. James raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. He reached for a notepad. Okay, what brought this on? I heard them, I said, my voice steady. I went to surprise him for his birthday. I heard him and Sandra talking. They called me an old hag. They wished I would die in a car crash so they could get the inheritance. James's pen stopped moving. He looked up, his expression hardening. Good Lord, Cynthia. I am so sorry. Don't be, I said. Just help me cut the cord. I want him off everything. The bank accounts, the medical proxy, the will, everything. We can draft the revocation of power of attorney right now, James said, typing on his computer. I'll have the notary come in. But Cynthia, what about the credit cards? You have him as an authorized user on the business Amex and the personal Visa. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Cancel them. Report them as, let's say, no longer authorized. Effective immediately. James nodded, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Done. I'll call the fraud department directly. It's faster. Do it, I said. He's probably waking up right now, realizing I'm not answering his calls. He's going to try to spend as much as he can before the well runs dry. I checked my watch. It was 9:15 a.m. 200 miles away, In Piedmont, my son was indeed waking up, but he wasn't panicking yet. He was arrogant. I can imagine the scene perfectly, because I know him. He probably told Sandra that I was just being dramatic. She's just sulking, he would have said. She'll call back in a few days. She always does. They had a big lunch planned. It was his birthday weekend. After all, they were going to Le Jardin, the most expensive French restaurant in the city. It was the kind of place where a salad costs $30, and the waiters look down on you if you ask for tap water. I sat in James's office as he made the calls. Yes, this is James Carter, attorney for Mrs. Cynthia Raleigh. We need to remove an authorized user. Timothy Raleigh. Yes, all cards. Right now. I watched him hang up the phone. It's done, James said. The cards are dead plastic. Good, I said. Now, about the house. Timothy and Sandra arrived at Le Jardin at 1 p.m. I know this because the transaction alert for the Uber ride, which was linked to my PayPal, popped up on my phone just before I unlinked that account too. They were with two other couples, friends of theirs, the kind of people who drive leased Rovers and talk loudly about their investments. Timothy was playing the big shot. He always did when he thought I was paying. He probably sat at the head of the table, laughing, pouring wine, telling stories about his consulting business. Oh, business is booming, he'd say. I'm managing a huge portfolio right now. The portfolio was me, and I had just liquidated it. The meal lasted 3 hours. They ate, they drank, they celebrated. Sandra probably posted a dozen photos on Instagram. Hashtag birthday boy, hashtag living the life, hashtag blessed. Then came the check. The waiter, a tall man with a stiff white apron, placed the leather folder on the table. The bill was likely over $800. Timothy didn't even look at it. He just reached into his wallet and pulled out the heavy Black American Express card, the one with my business name on it, but his name embossed below. He handed it to the waiter with a dismissive wave. Add 20%, he said loudly, making sure his friends heard. The waiter nodded and walked away. The table continued chatting. Sandra was probably applying lipstick, checking her reflection in a spoon. Timothy was leaning back, satisfied, full of expensive steak and wine. 5 minutes passed. The waiter didn't come back. 10 minutes. Finally, the waiter returned. He wasn't smiling anymore. He walked straight to Timothy, leaning in discreetly, but not discreetly enough. Sir, the waiter said, his voice tight. I'm afraid the card was declined. The table went quiet. Timothy laughed. A nervous, incredulous laugh. That's impossible. That's an Amex Black. Run it again. I did, sir, the waiter said. 3 times. It says card not authorized. Contact issuer. Timothy's face must have turned a shade of red that clashed with the tablecloth. There must be a mistake. Here. He pulled out the visa. My personal visa. The one intended for emergencies only, which he used for golf clubs. Try this one. The waiter took it. He walked back to the terminal at the server station. It was visible from the table. Timothy watched him. His friends watched him. Sandra stopped applying her lipstick. The waiter swiped. He shook his head. He swiped again. He looked at the receipt printing out. It wasn't a signature slip. It was a rejection notice. The waiter walked back. This time, he didn't lean in. He placed the card on the table. Declined, he said flatly. Do you have another form of payment? What is going on? Sandra hissed. Her voice wasn't sweet anymore. Tim, fix this. I don't know. Timothy stammered. He was sweating now. My mom, she must have. He stopped. He realized he couldn't say, my mommy cut off my allowance. Not in front of his rich friends. Is there a problem? Tim, one of the friends asked. Do you need us to get this? That was the dagger. The pity. The realization that the successful consultant couldn't pay for his own birthday lunch. No, Timothy said, his voice pitching up. I think my bank flagged it for fraud because it's a large amount. Let me call them. He pulled out his phone. He dialed my number. I was still in James's office, reviewing the draft of the new will. My phone was on the desk, face up. It lit up. Timothy, son. James looked at it. I looked at it. I didn't reach for it. I let it ring. 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 Are you going to answer? James asked softly. No, I said, he's at the restaurant. The bill just arrived. The ringing stopped. Then it started again immediately. Timothy, son. Back at the restaurant, the panic was setting in. The waiter was hovering. The friends were exchanging awkward glances. Sandra was furiously typing on her phone, probably texting me too. Timothy tried one more card. His own debit card. The one attached to his personal checking account, which usually had about $200 in it because he spent everything as fast as I gave it to him. Try this, he whispered. The waiter took it. He came back 2 minutes later. It covered $40, sir. The rest is still outstanding. The humiliation was complete. Timothy had to turn to his friend, a man named Greg, who he had been bragging to all afternoon. Greg, man, I'm so sorry. There's a glitch with my accounts. Can you spot me? I'll Venmo you as soon as I sort this out. Greg smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile you give a charity case. Sure, Tim. Don't worry about it. Greg threw his card down. Put it on mine, he told the waiter. The air had left the balloon. The party was over. The friends stood up, gathering their coats quickly. We should get going, Greg's wife said, not making eye contact with Sandra. Thanks for invite. They left. Timothy and Sandra were left alone at the table with the dirty dishes and the shame. Sandra turned to him. You said you had it handled. She hissed. You said she was just bluffing. She blocked me, Timothy said, staring at his phone in horror. She's not answering. The cards are dead. Sandra, she actually did it. You idiot. Sandra slammed her hand on the table. Fix it. Call her back. Go to Charleston. I can't. Timothy yelled back, forgetting they were in public. People turned to stare. I can't go to Charleston. I don't have gas money. I sat in the lawyer's office, staring at the phone that had finally stopped ringing. I felt a strange sense of peace. James, I said, picking up the pen to sign the revocation documents. Proceed with the eviction notice. Are you sure? James asked. That's a bell you can't unring. I signed my name with a flourish. Cynthia Marie Raleigh. They rang the bell, James, I said, handing the paper back to him. I'm just answering the door. I stood up. I'm going to go get some lunch. I think I'll treat myself to a nice salad, and I'm going to pay for it with my own card. I walked out of the office into the bright afternoon sun. My phone buzzed in my purse again. I ignored it. I walked to a little cafe down the street, sat by the window, and ordered a glass of iced tea. I took a sip. It tasted like freedom. I didn't know it yet, but the decline at the restaurant was just the first domino. The real crash was coming, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be there to cushion the fall. 3 weeks passed, 3 weeks of silence from my end, and 3 weeks of absolute chaos on theirs. Back in Charleston, my life had found a new, quiet rhythm. I opened the antique shop at 10. I drank my coffee while reviewing inventory, and I went home at 5 to walk Max on the beach. I wasn't rushing to the bank to transfer funds. I wasn't checking my phone every hour to see if Timothy needed emergency help. I had James, my lawyer, send a formal letter. It was brief. It stated that all financial support had ceased and that any attempt to contact me would be considered harassment. I blocked their numbers, their emails, and even their social media accounts. I didn't want to see the meltdown. I just wanted to know it was handled. But in a small town like Piedmont, news travels. And even though I wasn't there, the reports found their way back to me. I knew the consulting fee I used to pay Timothy, that $4,200 a month, was the glue holding their entire life together. Without it, the dominoes started to fall faster than I expected. It started with the car. Timothy had a job, a real job, though he barely mentioned it to me because he thought it was beneath him. He was a junior account executive at a marketing firm. He kept the job, mostly for appearances, so he could tell people he went to the office. But he relied on the image I bought him to keep that job. He drove the Mercedes SUV I leased. He wore the suits I paid for. He took clients out to lunches I reimbursed him for. On a Tuesday morning, Timothy drove into his office parking lot. He was scheduled to take a major client to a golf outing. This was his chance to prove he could actually close a deal without my help. He parked the white Mercedes right in the front row next to his boss's car. He walked inside, grabbed his coffee, and prepared his pitch. At 10 a.m., the client arrived. Timothy walked him out to the parking lot, smiling, shaking hands, playing the part of the successful businessman. "We'll take my car," Timothy said, clicking the key fob. But the lights didn't flash. The doors didn't unlock. That's because a flatbed tow truck was already backing up to the bumper. I wasn't there, but the security guard at the complex is a cousin of one of my bridge partners. She told me everything. Timothy ran toward the truck, waving his arms. Hey, what are you doing? That's my car." The driver, a burly man who had heard every excuse in the book, didn't even stop hooking up the chains. "Lease is in default, buddy. Order came down from Mercedes-Benz Financial this morning. Repo on site. Default." Timothy screamed, his face turning purple. "My mother pays the lease. It's on auto pay. There's a mistake. Take it up with your mother," the driver said, hoisting the SUV into the air. The client was watching. Timothy's boss was watching from the office window. "Tim," the client said, looking at his watch, "is this a joke?" No, I swear," Timothy stammered, sweating through his suit. "It's a banking error. Look, we can take an Uber." "An Uber?" the client scoffed. "To a country club? I don't think so." The client turned around, walked back to his own car, and left. Timothy stood there in the parking lot, watching the tow truck drive away with his status symbol. 10 minutes later, his boss called him into the office. "You're fired, Tim," the boss said. Not because he lost the car, but because he was a liability. A man who gets his car repossessed in the company lot in front of a client isn't a man you trust with company accounts. Timothy packed his box of desk toys I probably bought him, and called an Uber. He didn't have a car to drive home. He arrived at the house around noon, defeated, humiliated, and jobless. He probably thought it couldn't get any worse. He probably thought, well, at least I have the house. Mom can't take the house. We live here. He was wrong. He got out of the Uber and started walking up the driveway. That's when he saw it. Stuck firmly in the manicured lawn, right next to the rose bushes I planted 3 years ago, was a sign. A wooden post with a metal sign swinging in the breeze. For sale. Century 21. Coming soon. Timothy must have thought he was hallucinating. He ran up to the sign and kicked it. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed the number on the sign. "This is Brenda, Century 21. How can I help you?" "Why is there a sign on my lawn?" Timothy screamed. "I live at 405 Oak Creek Drive. Who authorized this?" "Oh, hello," Brenda said. Her voice was professional, chipper, and completely unbothered. I had briefed her personally. "You must be the tenant, Mr. Raleigh. I was told you might call." "Tenant?" Timothy sputtered. I'm not the tenant. I'm the owner. I've lived here for 10 years. Take that sign down, or I'll sue you. Actually, Mr. Raleigh, Brenda said, the sound of clicking keys in the background. I have the deed right here in front of me. The property is held in the Cynthia Raleigh Revocable Trust. Mrs. Raleigh is the sole trustee and owner. You are listed as an occupant. Silence. I imagine the blood draining from his face. He had forgotten. 10 years ago, when we bought the house, Timothy had bad credit. I told him I would put the house in my name, for now, to get a better interest rate. Later, when he got married, I suggested we keep it in the trust for asset protection. I told him it would protect the house if he ever got sued. He agreed because it made him feel important, like he had assets worth protecting. He never read the fine print. He never asked to transfer the title. He was too lazy, and frankly, he liked not having the liability. He thought the trust was protecting him from the world. He didn't realize it was protecting me from him. She can't sell it. Timothy whispered into the phone. My wife and I live here. She can, and she is, Brenda replied. The house is listed as of this morning. We have an open house scheduled for Sunday. Sunday? Timothy yelled. We're still in here. Well, about that, Brenda said, her voice dropping to that polite, Southern lawyerly tone. Since there is no formal lease agreement, you are considered a tenant at will. Mrs. Raleigh has instructed us to offer you a cash for keys deal to expedite the process. If you vacate the property within 30 days, leaving it in broom-swept condition, she will provide you with $2,000 for moving expenses. If not, the sheriff will serve the formal eviction notice on the 31st day. $2,000? Timothy laughed hysterically. This house is worth $600,000. Yes, Brenda said, and the proceeds will go to the owner. Do you want the email regarding the move-out checklist, Mr. Raleigh? Timothy hung up. He stood on the lawn of the house he thought was his kingdom, realizing he was just a squatter. The front door opened. Sandra came out. She was wearing her silk robe, holding a glass of wine, even though it was barely afternoon. She looked at Timothy, then at the sign, then back at Timothy. What is that? She asked, pointing a manicured nail at the sign. It's Mom, Timothy said, his voice breaking. She owns the house, Sandra. She owns it all. She's selling it. She can't. Sandra shrieked. Where are we supposed to go? I don't know, Timothy said. I just lost my job. The car is gone, and we have 30 days to get out. Sandra didn't rush to comfort him. She didn't hug him and say, we'll get through this together. She looked at him with pure disgust. The same disgust she used to say for me. You told me the house was ours. She hissed. You told me she just paid the mortgage, but it was our house. I thought it was. Timothy cried. You're pathetic, Sandra said. She turned around and walked back inside, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Timothy was left alone on the driveway. Back in Charleston, my phone rang. It was Brenda, the realtor. Hi, Cynthia, she said cheerfully. I just spoke to your son. He knows. How did he take it? I asked, sipping my tea. About as well as you expected, she said. He shouted a bit, but he knows he doesn't have a leg to stand on. The deed is ironclad. Do you want me to send over the listing agreement for your final signature? Yes, please, I said. And Brenda, make sure the open house is on Sunday. I want it sold quickly. Will do. Oh, and Cynthia. Yes. He mentioned he lost his job. Something about the car. I assumed as much. I said quietly, actions have consequences. Brenda, it's a lesson he should have learned at 5, but he's learning it at 40. I hung up the phone. I looked around my living room, my modest, cozy living room that I paid for with my own hard work. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have marble floors, but it was mine. No one could put a sign on my lawn. No one could take my keys. I felt a pang of sadness for the little boy Timothy used to be, the boy who used to hold my hand when we crossed the street. But I had to remind myself that the man on the driveway wasn't that boy anymore. That man was a stranger who laughed when his wife called me a hag. I walked over to the mantel and picked up a framed photo of Robert. "I'm doing it, Robert," I whispered to the photo. "It's ugly and it hurts, but I'm doing it. I'm saving what's left of our legacy." Timothy had 30 days. The clock was ticking. And as the sun set over Charleston, I knew that the hardest part, the final severance, was yet to come. Because when the money is truly gone and the house is gone, that's when people show you who they really are. And I had a feeling Sandra was about to show her true colors very soon. They say money is the root of all evil, but I disagree. I think the love of money is the root of evil. And the lack of money, well, that's the root of truth. When the bank accounts are full and the wine is flowing, it's easy to have a happy marriage. It's easy to overlook character flaws when you're distracted by luxury vacations and new cars. But when the faucet runs dry, when the credit cards are declined, and the tow truck hauls away the status symbol, that is when you see who a person really is. I didn't have to be a fly on the wall in that house in Piedmont to know what was happening. I knew the dynamic. Timothy was the provider in name only. I was the actual provider. Sandra was the trophy. And trophies don't like to sit on dusty shelves in foreclosure. The breakup happened 4 days before the move-out deadline. The cash for keys. Offer I made them. $2,000 to leave quietly was the final straw. Timothy wanted to take it. He was broken. He just wanted to get a small apartment and try to rebuild. But Sandra was furious. To her, $2,000 was an insult. It wouldn't even cover her skincare routine for a month. The neighbors told Brenda, my realtor, that the shouting matches were loud enough to be heard from the sidewalk. Sandra called Timothy a loser. She called him a mama's boy who couldn't even keep his mama happy. She blamed him for everything. She forgot, conveniently, that she was the one who poured the wine. She was the one who called me a hag. She was the one who wished for the crash. On a Thursday afternoon, Sandra packed her bags. She didn't pack everything, just the expensive clothes, the jewelry I had given her over the years, and her designer handbags. She left the wedding album. She left the sentimental things. She took the assets. She called a taxi, loaded her Louis Vuitton luggage into the trunk, and left my son standing in the driveway of a house he no longer owned, watching his marriage drive away. But Sandra didn't go to her mother's house. She didn't go to a hotel. She rented a car, a small economy sedan that must have hurt her pride to drive, and she pointed it east, toward Charleston, toward me. I was sitting on my back porch, watching the waves roll in. The ocean has always been my therapy. It's consistent. It's powerful. It doesn't ask for money. I had a cup of chamomile tea in my hand, enjoying the peace that had finally settled over my home. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My friends usually call first. I walked through the living room, Max the dog trotting at my heels. I checked the peephole. I saw a distorted, fisheye version of Sandra. She looked different. She wasn't wearing her usual heavy makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans. She looked humble. Or rather, she was costumed as humble. I knew exactly what this was. I opened the door, but I didn't step back. I filled the frame. "Sandra," I said. My voice was flat. No warmth. No anger. Just acknowledgement. "Mom," she breathed out. She looked like she was about to cry. It was a good performance. "Oh, Mom, thank God you're home." She tried to step forward, to hug me, but I didn't move. I kept my hand on the doorframe, blocking her path. She stopped, awkward and unsure. I'm not your mother, Sandra, I said, and you're not welcome here. Please, Cynthia, you have to listen to me, she pleaded, the tears starting to flow now. I left him. I left Timothy. I couldn't take it anymore. I took a sip of my tea. You left him because the money ran out. Let's not pretend it was for moral reasons. No, that's not it. She shook her head frantically. It was him. He's been so awful to you. He's been saying terrible things for years. I tried to stop him, Cynthia. I really did. I told him he should respect you. I told him, your mother is a saint. She does everything for us. But he wouldn't listen. I watched her face. It was fascinating in a sick sort of way. She was rewriting history in real time. She was throwing her husband, my son, under the bus to save her own skin. She thought that if she blamed Timothy, I would take her in. She thought I was just a lonely old woman desperate for a daughter, even a fake one. He made me do it, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. That night, the night of the storm, he was drunk. He started talking about the inheritance. I was just playing along because I was scared of him. I didn't mean any of it. I love you, Cynthia. You're the only family I have. She reached out to touch my arm. I took a step back. You were scared of him? I asked. Yes. Terrified, she sobbed. He's a monster. I looked her dead in the eye. I stood on that porch for 5 minutes. Sandra, I said softly. I listened to the whole conversation. Her face went pale. The tears stopped instantly. I heard Timothy. I said, he was weak. He was complaining. He was ungrateful. But you, I leaned in closer. It was your voice, Sandra. It was your voice that called me an old hag. It was your voice that said, I hope she crashes. It was your voice that fantasized about spending my money in Florida. She opened her mouth to speak, to lie again, but I cut her off. Timothy is a fool, I said. He's a weak, greedy fool that I spoiled rotten. But he didn't wish death on me. You did. I was drunk, she stammered, the humble act crumbling. Her eyes darted around, looking for an exit strategy. Alcohol doesn't put words in your mouth, Sandra, I said. It just lets the truth out. I looked past her, at the cheap rental car parked in my driveway. You picked the wrong horse, I told her. You thought Timothy was your ticket to a lazy life. When that ticket didn't pay out, you came here trying to cash in on my loneliness. But here is the thing about being alone. Sandra, I like it. I like it a hell of a lot more than being with people who want me dead. Cynthia, please, she said, her voice turning hard now. The venom was coming back. I have nowhere to go. He kicked me out. I have no money. You have a degree, I said. You have hands. I suggest you get a job. There are plenty of help wanted signs in town. I hear the grocery store is hiring baggers. Her jaw dropped. The insult hit its mark. Get off my property. I said, if you come back, I won't open the door. I'll call the police. You're a bitter old witch, she screamed. The mask was fully off now. Her face twisted into the ugly sneer I had imagined that night in the storm. He was right about you. You're going to die alone in this house, and your cats will eat you. I have a dog. I corrected her. And he has better manners than you. I stepped back and closed the door. I didn't slam it. I just clicked it shut. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening. I heard her scream something incoherent outside. Then I heard a car door slam. Then the sound of an engine revving and tires spinning on the gravel. She was gone. I walked back to the porch and sat down. My tea was still warm. I took a sip. It was the best cup of tea I had ever tasted. Justice doesn't always look like a courtroom gavel. Sometimes it looks like a rental car driving away in shame. Back in Piedmont, the house on Oak Creek Drive was quiet. Timothy was sitting on the floor of the living room. The furniture was gone. He had sold the sofa and the dining table on Facebook Marketplace yesterday just to get some cash for a motel. The house echoed. It was a big, hollow shell. He had no wife. Sandra hadn't even said goodbye. She just left a note saying she was contacting a divorce lawyer. He had no job. No one in town would hire him after the scene at the marketing firm. He had no car. He was going to have to call a taxi to take his boxes to the cheap motel on the highway. And most painfully of all, he had no mother. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. He looked at my contact. It was still blocked. He couldn't call to ask for $20. He couldn't call to cry. He couldn't call to blame Sandra. He looked around at the walls. He remembered the Christmas parties. He remembered the dinners. He remembered how easy it had all been. All he had to do was pick up the phone once a week and say, "Hi, Mom," and the checks cleared. He realized then, sitting on the dusty floor, that he hadn't just lost money. He had lost his shield. He had lost the only person in the world who had actually loved him unconditionally until he pushed her too far. He put his head in his hands and wept. He wasn't crying for me. He was crying for himself. But for the first time in his life, he was crying tears that he had actually earned. The divide was complete. I was on my side of the chasm, safe and at peace. They were on theirs, turning on each other like starving wolves. I finished my tea, watched the sun dip below the horizon, and felt a profound sense of closure. The storm was over. The wreckage was cleared, and I was still standing. The sunset over Charleston Harbor was painting the sky in shades of purple and burnt orange. I sat on my terrace, a light blanket draped over my legs, watching the sailboats glide back toward the marina. Max, my golden retriever, was snoring softly at my feet. It was quiet. 6 months ago, silence used to terrify me. I used to fill the silence with worry. I would wonder why Timothy hadn't called. I would worry if the money I sent was enough. I would invent problems just so I could solve them, desperate to feel useful. Now, silence felt like a luxury. It felt like peace. I took a sip of my wine, a nice Chardonnay that I bought for myself, not for a party where I would be ignored. A lot had changed since that rainy night in Piedmont. The house on Oak Creek Drive sold in 3 weeks. The market was hot, and I got a good price. When the check cleared, I didn't put it back into my savings account to gather dust. I didn't buy a new car. I walked into James Carter's office and started the Raleigh Trust. It's a small foundation. We help women over 60 who have been financially exploited by their families. We pay for legal fees, we help with down payments on small apartments, and sometimes we just pay for therapy. It turns out there are a lot of women like me. Women who gave too much until they had nothing left but resentment. Helping them healed me. Every time I sign a check for the trust, I feel a weight lift off my chest. I'm not buying love anymore. I'm funding freedom. I heard the mailman's truck drive away from the curb out front. Max perked his ears up, but didn't bark. He's enjoying retirement too. I walked inside and picked up the stack of mail. Bill's catalogs, a postcard from a friend in Italy. And then, at the bottom of the stack, a plain white envelope. The handwriting was familiar, though it looked shakier than I remembered. There was no return address, but I knew who sent it. I took the envelope back out to the terrace. I sat down and stared at it for a long time. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. The panic I used to feel when dealing with Timothy was gone, replaced by a dull, distant ache. I used my thumb to slit the envelope open. I unfolded the single sheet of lined notebook paper. "Dear Mom, I don't know if you'll read this, You probably won't. I wouldn't blame you. I'm living in a studio apartment in Greenville now. It's not much, but it's clean. I got a job at a distribution center for a grocery chain. I load trucks on the night shift. My back kills me every morning, and the pay isn't great, but it covers the rent. Sandra and I are done. The divorce should be final next month. She took the jewelry, but she couldn't take the lesson. I think I'm finally learning mine. I was at the grocery store yesterday, buying dinner, just pasta and sauce, and I saw a woman who looked like you in the produce section. I almost walked up to her just to hear her voice. I realized then that I don't miss the money, Mom. I miss you. I miss Sunday dinners. I miss having someone in my corner. I'm not asking for anything. I don't want a check. I just wanted you to know that I'm alive. I'm working and I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Love, Tim. I read the letter twice. Part of me, the old part, the mother who drove through a storm, wanted to pick up the phone. I wanted to call him and say, "It's okay, baby. Come home. Let me fix your back. Let me buy you groceries." I imagined him lifting heavy boxes in the middle of the night. I imagined him eating alone in a small, empty room. It hurt. Of course it hurt. He is my son. But then I remembered the laughter. I remembered the old hag comment. I remembered the years of neglect that I had papered over with cash. If I saved him now, I would ruin him. He was finally becoming a man. He was earning his own bread. He was feeling the consequences of his actions. If I swooped in with my checkbook, I would rob him of the most important experience of his life, growing up. I folded the letter neatly along the creases. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't reach for my checkbook. I stood up and walked into my study. On the bookshelf, there is a small wooden box where I keep keepsakes, old photos, Robert's wedding ring, a lock of Timothy's baby hair. I placed the letter in the box and closed the lid. I forgive him. In my heart, right here on this terrace, I forgive him. I let go of the anger. I let go of the bitterness. But forgiveness doesn't mean access. Forgiveness doesn't mean I hand him the keys to my peace. He can be sorry, and I can be healed, and we can still live apart. That is the boundary I need to survive. Maybe one day, years from now, when he has truly built a life with his own hands, we can have coffee. Maybe, but not today, and not tomorrow. I walked back out to the sunset. The sun was gone now, leaving a streak of indigo across the horizon. The first stars were appearing. I sat back down and patted Max's head. He rested his chin on my knee, looking up at me with big, brown, loving eyes. He didn't want my money. He just wanted to be near me. I took a deep breath of the salty air. I drove 5 hours in a storm to deliver a gift to a son who didn't want me. I thought that trip was the worst night of my life. I thought it was the end of my world. But looking back now, I realize it was the beginning. I lost a son that night in the storm. I lost the illusion of a happy family. I lost the heavy burden of trying to buy love that should have been free. But I found something else. I found the woman I used to be before I became just a mother and a widow. I found my spine. I found my dignity. I found myself. And honestly, that was the best gift I could have received. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.